everyone back there as well? Wonderful. My name is Nadhra Shahbaz Khan. I teach at LUMS, and so I'm not here to introduce myself. I'm here to introduce our fabulous speaker. But before I introduce him and give a tiny little bit of today's theme, let me take a few minutes to kind of do the household, housekeeping management things. Once I do that, we will be treated to fabulous slides, and these are going to be laced with the meticulous scholarship of our presenter here, and of course with the unparalleled and matchless narrative skills that he has for almost 25 minutes or so. Is that right, sir? And then followed by this, we will have 10 minutes or so of questions and answers. And while this is going on, एक चीज़ मैं request करना चाहूँगी, please alienate yourselves from your cell phones. That is a request, because that is then not going to stand in the way between you and the scholarship and the knowledge that we are here to get benefit of. Phone bajenge, so everything gets distracted, the speaker will get distracted, and so it's going to be difficult. Our presenter today, Fakir Syed Aijazuddin, needs no introduction, but I will briefly introduce him as a reminder to ourselves of his achievements. He's studied and practiced accounts and finance. He's taught at LUMS, and he taught business management, accounting and finance as well. He has served at top positions in Pakistan and in the UAE. But while he was dealing with all of these demanding positions and demanding occupations, his relationship with the artistic aspects of 19th century Punjab never broke. They always went strong. And he's been a prolific publisher. He's been researching and he's been publishing, and this is his 22nd book, and I hope we have another 22 in the coming years. Let me say a few words about his fabulous publication. It has several things that we need to be celebrating. The first is that it may look, unfortunately we don't have the book here, but of course, I'm sure we'll have a title. It is outside. You must go and pick a copy of it for yourself and for your family. You must share it with your younger ones as well. It has several strong points. And as I was just about to say, it may look like a coffee table book, but it definitely qualifies as a textbook. A textbook for studying the material culture and the visual culture of Punjab. Another strong point of this is that Keith Moxey is his historian. Michael Rampley, he elaborates by saying that, aesthetic experiences actually are bodily and affective sensations. When we look at art, it is not only done in a moment where you do a kind of a reflexive judgment. It is more intuitive. Art takes its own life. And this is something that Fakir Syed Aijazuddin has done to the paintings that have stood silent, mute for a very long time in the Sikh gallery. His book is a welcome addition to scholarship on the visual and the material culture, and I won't stand in between you and him. Over to you.
Thank you so much indeed, Dr. Nadhra, and deeply grateful for your curatorship, as it were, of this session. Welcome and thank you for being here. The lecture will be entirely in English, so I hope that's not an inconvenience for you. Many of you may ask, what is the connection between a Hungarian painter and Lahore? Well, the connection is Scheofft, who was a painter who came here in the 19th century, and he came to Lahore attracted by the reputation of the Punjab. Now, the Punjab at that time, as you know, was under Sikh control, but it is of significance to us as persons who live in this area, whether we're Punjabis or not, but persons, Pakistanis who live here. It has relevance because during that time, it was the only time in 5,000 years that this territory that we know of as Punjab had ever been an independent kingdom. Never before and never afterwards. But it was during that period of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign, between 1792 until his death in 1839, and then the annexation of the Punjab in 1849, it's the only time that the Punjab existed as a separate state, a nation state. And that is why it was relevant, these paintings are relevant, because Scheofft happened to visit Lahore in the closing years of the Sikh Darbar. He came here in 1841, and he portrayed many of the personalities who were then involved in both the establishment of the Punjab as a state and with its disintegration. The connection between Scheofft and Hungary was not just Scheofft, but the Hungarian ambassador had come here, and he visited Lahore. He had to bribe his way into the Bamba collection and discovered that there was this collection of paintings by a Hungarian artist. He then set into motion, this gentleman, he was Istvan Schwabo and his wife, Emilia, they set into motion a proposal for bringing in experts to renovate these paintings, because these paintings, as Dr. Nadhra has said, they were in darkness, they were not very well looked after, many of them had been damaged, and so they were very keen that there should be a restoration project. That project was started initially 2016, but as you know, it takes time, and so it took 5 years before we could bring the team over here and to be able to work on the paintings themselves. ये बत्तियां बुझा देना इस वाली बत्तियां बुझा देना please. Yeah, but that's it. Perfect. Can you see? Clearly? Okay. Well, who was Scheofft? Scheofft belonged to a family of painters, and the street in which his house lives, and my wife and I, Shahnaz and I, visited that street, and it's a street known as the Street of Painters. Those of you who can already read Hungarian, but of course don't need a translation. Well, who was this Scheofft? Augustin Scheofft, or August Scheofft as we know him, was a Hungarian painter, fourth in the generation of painters, born in Pest, which was on the southern side of Budapest. And this is a portrait that he did of himself at the age of 25. Scheofft was skilled, but he was in an area of immense competition. From Paris, from Vienna, etc. So he decided that he'd like to try his luck by going to the east, and so he stopped in Egypt, the Levant, and finally found his way to India, where he arrived in 1839. And Scheofft mentions, I have to confess that many, not to say most of the English in India, have quite distorted views of Hungary. As far as they know, it's a small province inhabited by Germans, Slovakians, and Gypsies, and the more educated people speak Latin. Only a few Indians know that Hungary is actually an existing spoken language. But there were 3 hurdles that Scheofft had to overcome. One was permission to visit India, number 2 was accommodation, and number 3, introductions to notable people, and the 4th was recovering money for the work that he did in India. One of the earliest portraits that he did was of Firozabai Shapurji Baltiwala. And she was the daughter of a very rich Parsi merchant, J.J. Jamshedji Jajabai, after whom the famous school of the J.J. School of Arts was named. That is the one, by the way, where Professor Shakir Ali studied in Bombay. In September 38, he goes to Travancore, which was one of the states on the eastern side, and there he did a portrait of Rajaswathi Tirumal Ram. It was a good portrait, but unfortunately the man refused to pay. So Scheofft had to go all the way to Calcutta and get the Governor General to put pressure on the Travancore rulers to pay for the paintings. He was attracted to, while he was in Calcutta, he decided that he'd like to travel up country to the Punjab. And this was a painting that he did of the Maidan in Calcutta. En route, he traveled via Benares, today Varanasi, and where, because of the picturesqueness of it, he was intrigued by the Ghats. He continued via Allahabad, Lucknow, Kanpur, Agra, until he finally reached Delhi. He managed to arrange, while at Delhi, an audience with the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. One would have imagined that Bahadur Shah Zafar would have been agreeable to paying for his portrait to be painted. Instead, he demanded 300 French francs from Scheofft for the privilege of painting him. This is the famous portrait that many of you will recognize, which appeared on William Dalrymple's book, The Last Mughal. And William had no idea that this painting existed, but I was able to persuade him to look at the painting. I sent him illustrations of it, and then I found that this book was in fact included as the cover of his very popular book. And it was plastered all over the London Underground and on buses, etc. So Bahadur Shah Zafar had a new life following his deposition or disposal by the British. It's quite likely that while Scheofft was in Delhi, he then was able to see the paintings. He'd gone to Arcot, and he was able to see portraits of the Muhammad Shah and Muhammad Ali Khan, which were done by Tilly Kettle 50 years earlier. These were still in the Arcot collection. And if I go back to Bahadur Shah Zafar, well, you'll be able to see it from this. You can see the festoons of pearls and jewelry, etc. And all of it has been borrowed, I suspect, from that earlier version of the Arcot ruler. It's the illustration I showed you earlier was one that was published in a French magazine called Illustration. After Bahadur Shah's deposition, his abdication and his removal from Delhi, his belongings were sold. And this was the rather modest crown that belonged to Bahadur Shah Zafar. It was appropriated by a British officer and taken back to England. Queen Victoria heard of this and said it belonged to a king and therefore I should have it. And so she then bought it from this officer. It now is in the Royal Collection in Windsor. While he was in Delhi, Bahadur Shah Zafar, while he was in Delhi, Auguste Scheofft did a series of portraits. But those were sketches, I suspect, and they were then updated when he went back to Europe, because the paintings that we see of Bahadur Shah Zafar's son, fifth son, and who was his favorite, was Mirza Mughal, very ambitious. He then sided with his stepmother against the British and paid the price. He was arrested and murdered at Humayun's tomb, and he was forced to strip naked, killed, and then his body was left uncovered for 3 days. This is something they don't talk about in British history books. Mirza Mughal's younger brother, Mirza Jawan Bakht, is shown here as a rather callow young youth. In fact, when Scheofft visited Delhi, the boy was probably 11 years old or something. And so when Scheofft went back, using the familiarity with the sketches that he had done, he then did this particular portrait. But again, you see the Mughals wearing jewelry which they didn't own, and they didn't even have, because this is all post-Nader Shah, the looting done by post-Nader Shah. Scheofft then proceeded to Ambala, and from there to Ludhiana, which was the extreme western edge of the British Empire. He left his wife at Firozpur, and he crossed into the kingdom of the Punjab. There he was hosted by two people, Maharaja Sher Singh, whom you see on horseback on the left, and Dr. Martin Honigberger, whom you see with a breastplate on the right-hand side foreground and a red cap. Dr. Honigberger was a doctor who was attached to the Sikh court, and because of his Transylvanian background, he was the perfect host for Scheofft. Maharaj Sher Singh was an Anglophile, and the moment he heard that Scheofft had come to Lahore, he summoned him to Amritsar, where he happened to be holding darbar, and so Scheofft had an opportunity of painting the what they call the Golden Temple, and I think it's better known as the Gurdwara. It says Harmandir Sahib, and he did this painting, but it's a kind of anomaly because he puts Maharaja Sher Singh listening to the Granth Sahib being recited. And of course, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had died 2 years earlier. So this was in effect a kind of homage paid to the last major Sikh ruler of the Punjab. And here you can see Scheofft portraying Maharaja Ranjit Singh sitting on a cushion, but with the Kohinoor on his right bazuband. The Kohinoor was not worn as a turban ornament. It was worn as a bazuband, as I'll show you in a few moments. Included in the painting were the Akalis, the fearsome Akalis, who were the kind of orthodox Sikhs who were patrolling the sacred precincts. And because Scheofft, while he was painting, at one point put his brushes in his mouth, which the Akalis assumed that he was smoking it. And since smoking was forbidden, they then chased after him, harassed him, they hit him with a sword, his trousers fell off because the braces cut, and then Honigberger was able to rescue him and take him into his house. So the Thugis, the Akalis, had a kind of special, sinister significance in Scheoff's life, which is why he's included them even in the painting of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. There are small vignettes. So when you see the paintings, as I hope you shall, you'll see, look for the minor details, which is what Scheofft included in the paintings, like this young boy who's sitting, and while everybody is listening to the Granth Sahib, he is snoring, bored out of his mind. And none of the details are, for example, the elephants that are being that are going through the streets of Amritsar. No magnificent howdah here, just very simple padded cushion. The Thugis reappear in another painting, which is not in the Scheofft collection, and that is of the Thugis resting. Now, the Thugs were famous because they would waylay travelers. The travelers would be lulled into false confidence, and the Thugis would then suffocate them, garrote them, by using a handkerchief in which there was a coin. They would apply it and smother the man by constriction. In this painting, you look at it and it looks a fairly peaceful scene until you go into the detail that Scheofft expects you to see. And in that, you'll see here the Akali who's sitting on a mat and unaware that behind him, is a man twisting a handkerchief, which he's then going to use to kill him. But what is interesting is Scheofft had an eye for not only detail, but also for the social customs that we had. And when somebody saw this painting, it came up for sale, he said, you do realize that the upturned chappals are a sign of impending doom. All right? It is a sign that something is going to go wrong. And so, and you can see in the foreground, next to the dhal, there is a pair of chappals. Now, these are the kind of details that Scheofft was able to carry back with him in his mind and then transpose them onto the canvas. His host, Maharaja Sher Singh, magnificent. It looks as if he had the entire Toshakhana of Maharaja Ranjit Singh that he inherited poured over him. And so you see he's sitting on the golden throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which was then later confiscated and surrendered to the British, and he's holding in his right hand a scimitar and on the sword, and he's wearing the Kohinoor that I mentioned to you earlier as a bazuband on his left, and he's wearing a stone known as the Thamur ruby. This is the golden throne, which was taken by Lord Dalhousie, and then to Lord Dalhousie, to demonstrate his superiority and victory over the Sikhs, he had a duplicate made in wood, which he kept in his own private house. But when he accepted the annexation of the Punjab, he sat in Ranjit Singh's golden throne to reassert British supremacy. On the right-hand side, as I mentioned earlier, the Bazuband, which shows the Kohinoor. And that is what the Bazuband looked like. The Kohinoor, 186 carats, with 2 stones on either side, which are now used by the Queen as earrings. The stone was reduced from 186 to 106 carats. And in this, you can see the Thamur ruby, which was inscribed with the names of all the Mughal emperors who had owned it from Thamur onwards. This is how it was set by Queen Victoria in a necklace, which now exists in the Royal Collection. So if we are to ask for anything back, these are the jewels that we should be asking for. And then, as you remember, Sher Singh had a number of emeralds which were on his body, and these were then confiscated by the British, taken to England, and Queen Victoria had them set in a belt. This is also on display in Windsor Castle. I show you this because by the time Scheofft went back and did this painting, he did not have Sher Singh to model for him. So he used a Western model. And the reason I say he must have done is because when you look carefully at the hands, they are very well manicured. They're not the hands of a warrior. So it's clear that he had used a European with carefully prepared hands as his model. It was quite normal, quite normal. I mean, they would use the dresses, the clothes, etc., were added on afterwards. While he was in Lahore, he did, and this is in the Bamba collection, he did a painting on wood. And I suspect this is the sort of stuff that he did as a kind of reminder of what he would be taking back with him so that he could complete them into much larger canvases. He also did a painting, and this is a charming picture, of the wife of General Court. And here she's sitting, she was a Kashmiri woman, and she's sitting with her 2 children, and her name was Fezli Azam, Jew, and here she's sitting with her children, and in the background you'll see the Maqbara that is part of the railway property on Canal Bank. Scheofft returned to Europe after his sojourn in the Punjab. He returned to Europe, picked up his wife from British territory, goes off, and then returns via Agra and Bombay and goes back to the UK, to Europe. But he took with him the notebooks that he had prepared. And I was convinced that these notebooks do exist, and I'm told that there is somebody in Hungary who has the notebooks, but he refuses to allow them to be photographed. So it's one of the maddening things of scholarship here, which Dr. Nadhra would be more than familiar. While he was there, Scheofft, for the next 15 years, more or less, he was in Paris, and he exhibited paintings in Paris, in London, in Vienna, in London again, in 1859 and 1862. Honegger mentions that Scheofft had done a whole series of pictures for Sher Singh, and some of them were retained in the Toshakhana at the Lahore fort. Unfortunately, we have reference to it, but they did not exist. When he went back, though, he did a magnificent portrait, magnificent canvas, and that is their Hafwan Lahore, the court of Lahore. And in this, there are about 100 characters, individual characters who can be identified. And it was a challenge for me in 1979 when I was invited by the Department of Archaeology to first examine this picture. It was a challenge to be able to identify who was who. Fortunately, we had available a key. And this had been published by Scheofft in his exhibition in 1855, and it identified some of the characters, but it didn't explain why they were there. There were some notes, but not exhaustive. So I began to analyze the painting, and I realized there was a kind of similarity with another painting which was done by Tuxen, and that was of Queen Victoria in 1887 to mark her Jubilee, where she was surrounded by her family. And you can see there are more than 100 characters there. But what is interesting about this painting is the politics of the British court emerged because the Princess of Wales refused to appear with the Germans, her in-laws refused to appear with them. The Connaughts refused to appear with the Battenbergs, and they said, if they're included, we do not want to be in the picture. So then Tuxen had to rearrange the composition in such a way that the politics of the family were reflected. And I realized that that is, in fact, what happened in Schoeff's case. Scheofft grouped the characters within in certain major groupings. The first was the royal family itself, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. On his right, Maharaja Khadak Singh, who ruled only for a year. On his left, Maharaja Naunihal Singh, who again ruled for a couple of hours. On the 5th of November 1840, he was in such a hurry to be acknowledged as the ruler that he didn't bother to have a bath. He just went straight from the cremation site at Roshnai Gate through the gate. The gate fell on him and he died. And with him, he's looking up at Raja Udham Singh, who was Gulab Singh's son, who also died in the same accident. So Schoefft put all of them together as one of the central themes. Scholars had assumed that the painting is actually of Maharaja Sher Singh. I disagreed for a particular reason, and that was in the political scene, you could see the Sher Singh's son, Pratap Singh, sitting on the right, and he was murdered just outside Shah Bilawal, and his assassin is shown in green, in the green turban on the right. Here, you can see on the left Pratap Singh and Lena Singh Sindhawadia. In the foreground, I think is the key person at the time was Raja Gulab Singh. He had bought Kashmir from the British, from the Sikhs. In fact, they levied a fine on the Sikhs. He bought it, and at the time the painting was completed, he was the preeminent person in the Punjab. And so I think Schoefft included him and showed him offering nazar to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. You can see a number of characters here. Ajit Singh Sindhawalia looking up at his, and on the right-hand side, Lena Singh, and he's back-to-back with Raja Dehan Singh because he was his next victim. So all the politics of the Sikh court came through, and in the middle, in the white shawl, is Fakir Aijazuddin Sahab, who was my lineal ancestor's elder brother. On the right-hand side is Fakir Nuruddin, my lineal ancestor, and he is being importuned by a man, Fakir Haridas, who claimed that he could be buried underground for 15 days. That is a picture of Fakir Haridas. And in the middle, wearing scarlet here, and saluting Sher Singh, is Raja Hira Singh, after whom Hira Mandi is named. And on the right, Ranjit Singh's favorite horses and Sher Singh's horses, and you notice that they're bedecked with emeralds. And in that, the pommel of the horse has an emerald which is almost as large as an apple. Here is a tray of the jewels, and the Kohinoor you can see lying in a tray in the forefront of the tray. And in the background, again, those details for which Schoefft was so famous. You had the court preparing to depart, and the Kashmiri shawls which used to hang on the Baradari above Ranjit Singh's darbar. After Ranjit Singh's death and Sher Singh's assassination, the power devolved on Dalip Singh, who was only 8 years old at the time, and his rather ambitious mother, Rani Jinda. And this is a painting that was done not by Schoefft, but by a man called George Richmond when Rani Jinda was taken to England in 1861. This painting was done in March 1863. A number of sketches exist that Richmond had done of her. But what is interesting is that one of them was of the eyes, not of Rani Jinda, but of her son, because he had the same eyes. And so the artist said, I'd like to use his eyes instead of hers, because she was getting on by then. This is a sketch in crayons, which Richmond did. And this is a pencil drawing of her in 1863. Any similarity with Farida Khanum is purely accidental. And this is the finished portrait that was done by her. So this is the only picture that we have of this woman who, in fact, controlled the Punjab for 2-3 years and then led to its ultimate destruction as a state. After she died in 1863, her son had her hands carved in marble, and these are on display in the Sea Gallery at the Lahore Fort. Dalip Singh was taken at the age of 11 to England, and Queen Victoria then adopted him and treated him as a king, and it was natural. He had been the king, ruler of a state which was larger than the United Kingdom, and so she accepted that. She did a number of portraits of him. This is the one on the right, and this is by her famous court art painter, Winterhalter, who did this full-scale portrait of him in Buckingham Palace. And it is there that she asked for the Kohinoor to be brought, and in a flurry of misguided generosity, he gave the Kohinoor back to Queen Victoria and said, first it was taken by force, now I am returning it voluntarily to you. He became a member of the royal family, more or less, and so he attended all their royal weddings, and you can see him on the left-hand side. There's a very small detail, far left, he's wearing his turban, etc. And then she had him sculpted, and this painting, which is in the Lahore Museum, was inherited by his daughter, who then donated it to the Lahore Museum. It's by a man called Partridge. He was a very good-looking man, and as Dalhousie said, his eyes went on his mother, who had magnificent orbs. This painting is also in the Bamba collection, and you can see that he was a strikingly good-looking man. But then he went to seed, partly drink, partly extravagance. This is a portrait of him done in 1877, by which he was about 38 years old then. And he married an Egyptian Copt who couldn't speak any English, and he couldn't speak Arabic, and yet they married and produced 6 children. He then built this magnificent pile called Thetford Hall, Elverton Hall, and in it he recreated what he thought was in his inheritance of the East, and he made a kind of Sheesh Mahal in this country house. And that, you can see the painting on the right-hand side on display in the dining area. My wife and I visited in 1977, and we were taken inside after great difficulty, and it was magical. I mean, when you went in, it was just like being in the Sheesh Mahal. You came in from an English countryside into the house, and there was the Sheesh Mahal all over again. But he paid for it because he went bankrupt doing it. He then had a number of sons, and this is a painting done by George Richmond of his elder son, Victor Albert. Because of the association with Queen Victoria, she insisted that anybody who was close to her, her children, etc., should all be either called Victoria or Albert. So they had to have those 2 names in there. And then this one of the second son, Frederick Dalip Singh, done by Scheofft, who by this time had returned to London. All of these paintings are, by the way, in the Bamba collection. This one, Frederick Dalip Singh, much later. He then more or less devoted his life to Norfolk, where he had a country house, a modest country house. Before he moved into it, you can see up there Jawan Bakht, and you can see the portrait by Partridge on the left-hand side. But then he himself, running out of money, he moved into cramped quarters, and you can see the paintings now not hung on the walls, but in fact just left against the wall. A number of them, the one on Delhi, then the one Ranjit Singh listening to the Granth Sahib, and then the Partridge painting, and the one of Bahadur Shah Zafar. Maharaja Ranjit Singh's line ended with a daughter, with a granddaughter. And here you see the 3 sisters, daughters of the Dalip Singh, Bamba, Sophia, and Catherine. Bamba married Colonel Sutherland, who later became the principal of King Edward Medical College and also the Veterinary College here in Lahore. She moved to Model Town, where she died in 1957. She bequeathed the entire collection of paintings to her secretary, Pir Karimberg Supra, and also her house. But Pir Karimberg Supra had about, I think, 3 or 4 sons. And so the house was gradually cannibalized. So that is before and after. The Patiala royal family had a copy made of the painting, which now exists in the palace at Patiala. And here you can see the artist, a woman called Lillian Morton, who was commissioned to do the painting. And if you go to Amritsar, you'll see a facsimile of this using models, life-size models. And I'm rather proud that they used my research to be able to reconstruct this particular panorama. As I mentioned to you, the paintings had remained languished. And so let me just conclude very quickly. The paintings had languished. And when we brought the Hungarian team in here, there were 4 women and 1 man, very skilled. They'd all been trained in Budapest. They came in here and tackled each one of the paintings very systematically and scientifically. And here you see them at work on this huge 16 feet by 20 feet canvas. These are the members of the team, and they sent me this photograph because I sent a copy of my book to them, and so they had a photograph taken, each one of them, with a copy of the book, and they sent it to me, which I've included here. I won't bore you with their names, but they were led by Erica. Just to show you the quality of the work that they did, this shows you a before and after situation. That is Calcutta, the painting of Calcutta before and after. That is the painting of Sher Singh in Council, before on the left and after. That is Delhi on the left, before and after. That is Diwan Bakht, before and after. And you can see how meticulous the reconstruction work was. And that is our friend Sher Singh, before and after. That is the painting in Amritsar, and this shows you on the same canvas the before and after effect. I can appreciate this because I had a cataract operation done the other day, some weeks ago, and they did one eye first and then the second eye. But it was only when one eye had been done that I realized how defective the vision of the second eye was. And that's clearly visible in this, the kind of damage that had been caused by the weather and by dirt, etc., in this painting. Scheofft goes back to England, Europe, he goes to the United States, he paints a number of the southern, and he goes to Mexico, returns to London, and dies penniless, and is buried in an unmarked grave. It was a tragedy, for here was a man who had consorted with kings, and instead he died anonymously in London. This is the Schoefft painting of the Darbar of Lahore, before and after, and you can see what a magnificent job the restorers did. He signed many of the paintings, and so we were able to identify each of the paintings, and all the signatures are hidden in little corners of the picture. He went to the US, as I said, then to Mexico. 1874, he's declared bankrupt. 1888, he dies and is buried without a tombstone. But in a sense, you don't need a monument to Scheofft, because the monument was this magnificent painting that he did and all of the other related portraits which exist in the Princess Bamba collection. So I earnestly advise you to go and see it and understand and see through his eyes the heritage of Punjab history as it existed in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and the way it has been now brought back to life, as Dr. Nadhra has just said, the paintings brought back to life, and therefore the individuals within them have been reincarnated. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you very much for this fabulous tour of this Princess Bamba collection, insights into not only August Schofft's life, but also the characters that he was painting in our hair forever to stay. As you rightly said, this is, he doesn't really need a tombstone. This is actually something that is going to keep him alive for all times to come, for as long as these paintings are here, and as long as people like you are here to teach us and, decode all of these myths that are embedded in these paintings. Thank you very much from the depth of my heart. I'm told that we probably have Not really. We have a few minutes and we can probably take a couple of questions if there are any. Um, please come forward or, yes, please go ahead.
Sana, don't blame me. Let me answer your question very briefly. Paintings belong to the Department of Archaeology. And because there is now a bifurcation between possession and responsibility ownership, the paintings belong to the Department of Archaeology, which is the federal department, and they are in the Lahore fort, which is under the custody of the walled city of Lahore. Well, walled city of Lahore. And so, in order to get in, you have to get permission from two agencies, two departments. It's absurd. Now, the whole question arises about the paintings themselves. What do you do to protect them and preserve them for another 50 years? And 150 years, because it's now 1861 to now, is more or less 160 years. So how do we do it? Well, the answer is that the government has to come forward. I know private philanthropists have offered to build a new gallery in the Lahore fort and move these paintings there. So let's see what happens, but let's hope for the best. Very simple. Under the terms of the Treaty of Lahore, the Kohinoor was surrendered to Queen Victoria. Okay? But the interesting part of it is it was 186 carats when it was surrendered. Queen Victoria, it was defective, and so her jewelers advised her to have it cut so that they could reduce it to a perfect brilliance. So they cut it to 106 carats. And I remember asking William Dalrymple when he wrote his book on the Kohinoor, so I said, yeah, it was 186 carats when we sent it, and now it's only 106 carats. And we're asking for the 106 back, so shouldn't we be asking for the rest of it? Wo kahan gaya? And he said, it never occurred to me. I said, but, I mean, they couldn't have just thrown the stuff away. It had historical value. So even if it was crushed, whatever it was part of the Kohinoor. They hadn't thought of it. We can't get it back because the British won't. It was with great difficulty they gave you Pakistan in 1947.
To kind of add on to this, do you really think the Kohinoor was defective, or was it displayed under certain light conditions that did not add any luster to the beautiful stone?
Well, I mean, it was a flawed diamond in the sense that its only quality was its historical importance, Nadhra and before, etc. But also the fact that it was so solid. It was the largest known diamond at the time, right? Uncut, as most of the jewels were. As you noticed here in the pictures, they were unpolished, except that Scheofft, in order to prettify his picture,
had added
and gave them, a kind of polished sheen to them, the emeralds, etc. So, but it was primarily its historical importance that mattered, not the intrinsic. I mean, it was, as many of the stones, the ones that are in the imperial collection, or what was the imperial collection in Tehran, all of those stones, they're uncut, or the Olaf diamond you take in the Kremlin, it's uncut, but its importance is the historical one and the fact of its size.
Right, right. Thank you so much. I've been told many times that we're running out of time. We've actually run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, sir.
Quick word of thanks to Dr. Nadhra and also to Arsalan. Where are you, Arsalan? Arsalan? Is he here? Arsalan,
It's probably busy.
there you are.
There he is.
When I came into the room after 3 attempts at trying to get my thing loaded onto the PowerPoint, onto the computer, I was told, oh, we don't have PowerPoint. I said, hang on, you can't expect me to do a PowerPoint presentation without PowerPoint. And so we went through this trauma, all right? It's like giving birth to sextuplets simultaneously. And Arsalan then stepped forward, and he had it loaded, and I brought my computer, and within 2 seconds, the thing was linked up, and that's how we were able to make the presentation in time. So thank you. Wonderful job. Thank you.